honor for me that I sit here once more as a chair moderator in a panel with distinguished speakers to discuss global affairs. In this panel, we're going to focus on East Med and great power politics. Therefore, I welcome Ms. Julie Fisher. She's the U.S. Ambassador to Cyprus. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Michalis Chrysochoidis, former Minister of Citizen Protection of Hellenic Republic. Good evening. Mr. Evangelos Kalpadakis, diplomatic advisor to the leader of the main opposition, SYRIZA. Good evening. Mr. Cagaptay, director of Turkish research program, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Good evening. Mr. Henri Barkey, professor of international relations and senior fellow for Middle East studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Good evening. And Mr. Alexandros Diakopoulos, retired vice admiral and former national security advisor. Good evening. So, Mrs. Ambassador, since U.S. play a major role in the area, how do you see the future role of the 3+1, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and United States, of course, to promote cooperation and security in the area?
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And it's such a pleasure to be here at Delphi. It's my first time attending the Delphi Economic Forum, so I really am pleased to join this conversation, which brings together so many people from the region to think about these big questions. For us, the 3+1, as you refer to it, right, the grouping of Greece and Cyprus and Israel, and then the +1 being the United States, is a really valuable forum for us as we think about how we cooperate, how we find synergies, how we can leverage the relationships that we have bilaterally, and then what it is we can do together collectively. I think, you know, sort of, if I think about the larger topic for the panel, and I think about the question of great power challenges, great power politics in this region, you know, if we want to, we particularly those who are in the 3+1, want to be effective at advancing the rules-based order, at advancing a sense of fair competition, if we want to define the future based on the rules that we understand benefit our citizens and for the benefit of our citizens, it is groupings like this that are going to help us succeed in doing that. So, you know, we all go through election cycles, we all go through various elements of this, but the 3+1 is a format that has a lot of versatility and a lot of utility. And so, you know, we have interparliamentary meetings of the 3+1. We have the opportunity to bring, you know, our senior energy officials together, ministers of foreign affairs. You know, it is one of the things that I think is particularly valuable about this format. And we're going to be looking, I think, for a lot of ways to advance this work we're doing regionally together, again, because I think it is of tremendous benefit to the citizens of our nations.
Thank you. Κύριε Χρυσοχοΐδη, η πρέσβης περιέγραψε την κατάσταση στην Ανατολική Μεσόγειο, μίλησε για το 3+1. Ήθελα λοιπόν να σας ρωτήσω πώς εσείς αξιολογείτε ως Νέα Δημοκρατία την κατάσταση στην Ανατολική Μεσόγειο και εφόσον ξαναγίνει η κυβέρνηση Νέα Δημοκρατία, ποιοι θα είναι οι βασικοί άξονες της εξωτερικής σας πολιτικής?
Κοιτάξτε, μιλάμε για μια ίσως την θερμότερη περιοχή του πλανήτη, ουσιαστικά. Έχει η κυρία μετάφραση.
Θα πάρει. Θα τις φέρουμε. Συνεχίστε.
Μιλάμε λοιπόν για την πιο θερμή περιοχή του πλανήτη. Κυρίαρχα στοιχεία είναι η ανασφάλεια, η αστάθεια και η ένταση. Δυστυχώς υπάρχει ένα ζήτημα το οποίο εξελίσσεται ανά δεκαετίες προς το χειρότερο, δηλαδή κάθε δεκαετία τα πράγματα γίνονται ακόμα πιο ασταθή. Κάθε δεκαετία έχουμε περισσότερους πολέμους και τώρα που ανακύπτουν και τα ενεργειακά ζητήματα, τα πράγματα γίνονται ακόμα χειρότερα. Και αυτό είναι τραγικό δυστύχημα με τεράστιες συνέπειες για όλη την περιοχή. Μιλώντας για την Ελλάδα, η οποία είναι το front line της Δύσης, της Ευρώπης, η Ελλάδα χρόνια τώρα επιχειρεί με βάση το διεθνές δίκαιο να μπορέσει να διαχειριστεί τις κατά καιρούς κρίσεις και ταυτόχρονα να υπηρετεί την σταθερότητα, την ειρήνη και την ασφάλεια στην περιοχή. Νομίζω ότι θα συμφωνήσουμε όλοι ότι έχει γίνει κάτι μοναδικό τα τελευταία χρόνια, στα χρόνια της διακυβέρνησης του Κυριάκου Μητσοτάκη και της Νέας Δημοκρατίας. Δηλαδή, για πρώτη φορά, η Ελλάδα έχει αποκτήσει πολύ ισχυρές συμμαχίες οι οποίες έχουν στην πράξη αποτελέσματα με τις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες, με τη Γαλλία. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση για πρώτη φορά έχει πάρει καθαρές θέσεις σε σχέση με την ακεραιότητα και την ανεξαρτησία της Ελλάδας. Πολύ καθαρές θέσεις που δεν έπαιρνε το προηγούμενο διάστημα. Το ίδιο το ΝΑΤΟ. Έχουμε διαμορφώσει σχέσεις συμμαχικές με πολλές χώρες της περιοχής. Έχουν διαμορφωθεί συμφωνίες πολύ σημαντικές σε ό,τι αφορά τις θαλάσσιες ζώνες και νομίζω ότι αυτή είναι μια μοναδική στιγμή μαζί με τη δύναμη αποτροπής που κάθε μέρα χτίζει η Ελλάδα. Μια δύναμη αποτροπής που οφείλεται σε μια σειρά εξοπλιστικά προγράμματα της χώρας, στο επίπεδο και στο πεδίο της πολεμικής αεροπορίας, του πολεμικού ναυτικού, του εξοπλισμού με 54 εξοπλιστικά προγράμματα συνολικά των ενόπλων δυνάμεων και έτσι νομίζω ότι έχουμε κατορθώσει να έχουμε αυτή τη στιγμή μια δύναμη αποτροπής που δημιουργεί μια νέα σχέση και μια νέα ισορροπία δυνάμεων στην περιοχή.
Ευχαριστώ. Thank you. Now I will move to Mr. Kalpadakis, who is the representative of the main opposition party. Mr. Kalpadakis, I'm sure you will agree with what Mr. Chrysochoidis said, that Greece is in the front line in Eastern Mediterranean. What is the policy of SYRIZA in the area? I remember during the government of your party, you upgraded the relationship with Israel and with Egypt. So if you are in power again, what should we expect from the Cyprus government?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Well, what I could say for sure is that the SYRIZA government and a progressive government in Greece will continue a policy similar to the one that was carried out in 2015-19. The first priority will be in the field the protection of sovereignty and the sovereign rights of Greece against any dispute and any unlawful action by Turkey. And clearly the same will happen on the level of diplomacy. For example, during the time of the SYRIZA government, framework was established for sanctions, for European sanctions against possible violations in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean that could be useful in the future. And just to make clear, 2018, March 2018, was actually the first European Council statement where very clearly it was underlined that the EU supports in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean the sovereignty and sovereign rights of Greece and Cyprus, which was a framework inherited by the Mitsotakis government a few years later. So this is the basis on which we will work in terms of defending our interests. From that point on, I think we have to think more broadly about the role of Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean. As you said, the partnerships with Israel and Egypt, partnerships that were developed also and started during the Papandreou and Samaras government, were accelerated during the SYRIZA government period. And the goal is that Greece is a European pillar of peace and stability, strengthening peace and stability, as Minister Chrysochoidis said, at the same time projecting leadership with concrete initiatives. And part of that is resolving international differences with our neighbors. This is clearly what SYRIZA did on the name issue with North Macedonia, resolving an issue that was there for 27 years. This is what it tried to do in Switzerland with the Crans-Montana talks. And this is what it will try to do again as time goes by, strengthening the role of Greece as an energy and economic hub on the basis of work we've done in the past, but also trying to find a way to develop dialogue, particularly with Turkey, on the basis of international law. We consider that this is a very crucial time. The earthquake in Turkey has opened up a new period in terms of the climate, but the climate of relations is certainly not enough. What we need to see is a concrete framework for diplomatic talks on the basis of international law, and a clear agenda where what we are discussing moves towards going to the International Hague Court and submitting a proposal for the resolution of the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf issue. So a very specific agenda on the basis of international law, and we hope to see support of partners in this direction, because what will be the worst development, and this is something we should all be watching, is that after the Turkish elections, a positive agenda is opened, and in the basis of this positive agenda with the West and Turkey, either it is a big positive agenda or a smaller one, we have to clearly include the positive agenda and the conditions that are included in developing Greek-Turkish relations and Greek-Turkish dialogue. And we have very specific ways in which we believe this can be done after the elections.
Thank you. Now moving to Mr. Cagaptay, because you are very well familiar with Turkish politics, and we see that Turkey is trying to reset with both Israel and the United States. How do you see on that, and what happens with the balance with Greek Israel and Greek US ties?
Thank you, and thank you also for Delphi Economic Forum for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been to Greece many times. It's my first time in Delphi. It's breathtaking. Of course, Greece is a beautiful country. I think what we have seen in the last decade, I would say, was a seismic shift in the East Mediterranean, where Israel and United States had historically strong ties with Turkey. And as Turkish ties with Israel and United States deteriorated, Greek ties with Israel and US have improved. So it's kind of as if, one side went down and one side went up. In relationship to that, I could even say that, considering non-Arab countries in the East Med, Greece has now become Israel's best strategic ally. That's quite important. So it's replaced Turkey, which used to be Israel's best ally considering non-Arab countries in the East Med. I don't think I could say the same for the United States. I think the United States still seems to want to have a balanced policy of keeping strategic ties with both Turkey and Greece strong. Though Greece has also, I think, made advances far outpassing Turkey in this regard. Defense relationship with the United States is quite strong. But I think the Biden administration and also in general, Washington wants to kind of cultivate strong economic defense ties with Turkey. Turkey's request to buy F-16s stalled in the Congress. Now there's signs that this might be moving forward. So Turkey now wants to reset with both US and Israel. I think that the resets are going well, though I doubt that the Israelis will be willing to kind of drop everything they have built with Greece in the interest of resetting with Turkey. I think that Israel will want to continue two separate tracks, strong defense ties, economic ties, and intelligence cooperation with Greece, and also build new ties with Turkey, mostly economically driven, but not substituting what it has with Greece with what it could have with Turkey. I think the United States, once again, will have slightly more balanced approach, will want to reset with Turkey, build that relationship up, but also will cultivate what it has with Turkey. So I guess the conclusion is that Israelis have learned not to put all their eggs into one basket. All their eggs were in the Turkey basket. Now they have decided to put all their eggs into the Greece-Cyprus baskets. Right. And the United States will keep eggs in both baskets, Turkey and Greece together going forward.
Okay, thank you. Professor Barkey, in the context of great power politics, regarding the East Med pipeline, was it the right decision, the cancelling of that? Because I read some articles of you that you criticize the fact that it has been cancelled.
Again, thank you very much for being invited here to the Delphi Forum. Let me just put it a little bit in the context of great power competition in the region. And that is that we see today that Russia is really losing a great deal. Russia never really brought a great deal to the table, except for sheer brute force. And in many ways, the pipeline deals and the gas finds were not to Russia's advantage. So things are changing in the region a great deal. And what is happening is that now we're seeing an American ascendancy. People, it's hard to think sometimes or imagine American ascendancy, but if you look at the US position in the region, it not only has shifted, as Soner also implied, relationship between Greece and Turkey and the United States. Let me just quote somebody I think people in this country like very much, Nick Burns. Nick Burns 2 years ago in the Alex Filon lecture in Washington said that Greece has become the most important military partner in the Eastern Med for the United States. Whereas 10 years ago, we would have said it was Turkey, right? So there's a way in which that has been balanced. So Turkey, United States now is in a much better position. And in that context, I will also suggest that if you look at what United States pulled between Lebanon and Israel, that deal was also an impossible deal that nobody thought it could be. So you have an America which is on the ascendancy. And paradoxically, this America basically killed the East Med pipeline. Personally, I thought initially it was that it was a mistake, but I think in retrospect, I think it was the right decision. Right. That this was a $10 billion, 6-year proposal that would not have given great flexibility, whereas with the development of LNG, etc., there's a great deal more flexibility, plus you have now the electric pipelines, or should we say, lines that will be going to Europe. So in some ways, I think it was the right decision in that respect, but you're seeing that America has much more freedom in the region. And let me just say one more thing about great powers. The Chinese have been very interested in the region. They've invested, as you know, here in Greece, in Piraeus. They've invested in Israel. They've invested in Turkey. So the Chinese are also trying to make a breakthrough. But I think there's no Russia except a brute Russian force. And there's America, which has relationships with everybody. And the Chinese will be coming in, but much later.
Right. Thank you, Professor. I don't know, Admiral, if you agree with what you heard and about the change of roles regarding the East Med pipeline and if Greece has enhanced its role in the area.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And okay, on my part, I want to thank the organizers for having me here in such a distinguished panel. It's a real honor for me to be here. And being the last one, although I had things to say, I will make some comments about what we heard. So let's start with the pipeline, the East Med pipeline. I have to tell you, but this is personal, I mean, it's not an official line. Even from the time that I was in the national security, I was a little bit skeptical, not of this project, but of the feasibility of this project economically and geopolitically. Or to rephrase it, I was skeptical as long as the Italians haven't been completely committed on this project. On the other hand, we have to understand that there were some very positive things about this East Med pipeline. First of all, the relation between Greece and Israel. It would give, beef to the bones of this relation. The nominally strategic relation would become really strategic relation. But that is from the point of view of Greece. If we see it from the point of view of Europe, and especially regarding to what happened with Russia, okay, you understand that the thing of energy security is extremely important. And all the pipelines going to Europe were either traversing Russia or Turkey. And the only one who would go outside and directly to European Union, I mean Greece and via Greece to Italy, was this East Med pipeline. So geostrategically, I don't understand why the West would see, it's very obvious to me that you should have such a pipeline, especially having in mind that Turkey, the last 10 years, had a very transactional and non-ideological point of view in its international relations. And having in mind that Turkey was applying this power politics in the area, something that somehow has changed the equilibrium of the whole East Mediterranean. So if you ask me, I think that even if it's not economically the best project, geopolitically is the best project. Although there are alternatives, as you know, to have the the gas coming from Egypt via Cyprus and then to Europe. Now, if I may make a very, very small comment, I mean, on what Mr. Cagaptay said, which I agree. I mean, his analysis was sound, and I agree with this analysis. But again, you see on this analysis, sound though it is, the zero-sum game mentality, which is the United States was friend of Turkey and Israel was friend of Turkey. Now they became friends of Greece. Something one loses, the other one gains. I believe, and I believe especially for Eastern Mediterranean, that we should change to a positive sum mentality, where United States and Israel and everybody else, for that matter, can be friends with any other. And that would really enhance the stability of the region. Okay.
Thank you. Ambassador, do you have a comment on all the things you heard, and how do you see the role of Cyprus, since you are newly appointed ambassador in the island?
Thank you. You know, there's so much around this topic to discuss. There's so many really interesting points that have been raised. Maybe I will pick up, though, on the East Med gas pipeline, just as an illustrative point, because I think it is important to recognize exactly what you said. You said economically, maybe it wasn't the best project, but maybe geopolitically it was. Exactly. And you know, this is a part of the great power politics struggle that I think we are engaged in. And it is, how do we make decisions? How do we use the resources we have available to us? How are we accountable, again, to our taxpayers, to our fellow citizens? And you know, the East Med gas pipeline, I would like to object to the characterization that it was killed by Washington, right? These are economic decisions driven by economic actors. And you know, this is part of how we show who we are collectively, how we act together as allies, as partners between the European Union, the United States, member states. You know, all of this is reflective, again, of what are the outcomes we are looking for as we engage in this great power politics struggle. And so, you know, the economic decisions matter. I mean, fundamentally, of course they matter. I couldn't agree with you more about the need to get away from the zero-sum elements. And I think, you know, this is something as we think about that 3+1 cooperation, as we think about what we're doing on the island in Cyprus, what the United States is doing, you know, getting away from the idea that there are choices in partnership in this region, right? We would like to partner with those that are going to share our values, that are aspiring to those same outcomes that we're looking for. And so, you know, once we, when we get through election cycles, when we understand the voice as people, voters are going to express themselves, not thinking about it as a choice to cooperate in this direction or that direction alone, but really looking for those meaningful outcomes that we can produce together. I think that you know, the work we've done in Cyprus, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, we have really expanded our cooperation. We have really expanded the work we are doing together to build towards security and stability and to a level of confidence in that area. And I think there's a lot more we're going to be able to do going forward.
Right. Thank you. Να φύγουμε λίγο από το θέμα του East Med, του αγωγού East Med, να το διευρύνουμε λίγο για τα θέματα που απασχολούν την περιοχή. Και κύριε Χρυσοχοΐδη, ένα θέμα που κληθήκατε εσείς να χειριστείτε ως Νέα Δημοκρατία ήταν το μεταναστευτικό. Όλοι θυμόμαστε ότι ήταν κομβικό σημείο της διακυβέρνησής σας η κρίση στον Εύρο εκείνο τον περίφημο Μάρτιο. Πώς αξιολογείτε λοιπόν τη στάση της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και της κυβέρνησης, και αν είναι ένα θέμα που ήρθε για να μείνει και να κληθείτε να το διαχειριστείτε εφόσον ξαναγίνετε κυβέρνηση?
Ευχαριστώ πολύ για την ερώτηση. Κοιτάξτε, υπάρχουν ζητήματα που έχουν μια παγκόσμια διάσταση, για τα οποία όμως η πολιτική αποφεύγει να πάρει σαφείς και καθαρές θέσεις, με αποτέλεσμα αυτά τα προβλήματα να διονγκώνονται χρόνο με το χρόνο και να τα διαχειρίζονται κατά καιρούς διάφορες δυνάμεις, είτε λέγονται μη κυβερνητικές οργανώσεις, πολλές φορές το φαινόμενο της μετανάστευσης, με συγχωρείτε, το οποίο είναι τεράστιο, το χειρίζονται κάποιοι με έναν τρόπο εργαλειακό και ούτω καθεξής. Νομίζω ότι είναι η ώρα για την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση να διαχειριστεί το θέμα με ευθύνη, να διαχειριστεί το θέμα αποδίδοντάς του την πραγματική του διάσταση, το πραγματικό του μέγεθος και να αναζητηθούν λύσεις. Και θέλω να είμαι πολύ σαφής σε αυτό, γιατί είμαι μάρτυρας και διαχειριστής μιας κρίσης πριν από 3 ακριβώς χρόνια στον Εύρο, όπου ξαφνικά μια μέρα είδαμε ένα σούρουπο που πήγα στον Εύρο, στις Καστανιές, είδα δεκάδες χιλιάδες ανθρώπους να κρατούν δάδες και να ζητούν να εισέλθουν στη χώρα με το έτσι θέλω, χωρίς ταξιδιωτικά έγγραφα. Και αυτό ήταν κάτι που είδα πρώτη φορά στη ζωή μου, πρώτη φορά στη διαδρομή μου και προσπαθούσα να αντιληφθώ τι ακριβώς συμβαίνει. Βεβαίως η διαχείριση της κρίσης έγινε από την Ελλάδα υποδειγματικά, χωρίς να πειραχθεί κανείς άνθρωπος από αυτούς τους δυστυχισμένους που ήρθαν εκεί με παρακίνηση και παρότρινση του Προέδρου Ερντογάν, δημόσια, γι' αυτό αναφέρω το όνομά του. Κανείς δεν πειράχτηκε, ωστόσο κανείς δεν πέρασε και θέλω να σας πω ούτε πρόκειται να περάσει με αυτόν τον τρόπο. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση έχει ψηφίσει και έχει καθιερώσει θεσμούς και νόμους, η συνθήκη Σένκεν, υπάρχουν νομοθετημένα σημεία όπου μπορεί κανείς να εισέλθει. Υπάρχει το ζήτημα της προστασίας, της ανθρωπιστικής και του ασύλου, που είναι προφανές, αυτονόητο και επιβεβλημένο να στηρίζουμε, να υποστηρίζουμε και να υποδεχόμαστε και να περιθάλπουμε τους ανθρώπους που έχουν ανάγκη προστασίας. Αλλά από εκεί και πέρα είναι προφανές ότι η Ελλάδα δεν μπορεί να διαχειριστεί ούτε ανθρωπιστικά, ούτε κοινωνικά, ούτε οικονομικά, ούτε από πλευράς ασφάλεια μόνη της και άλλες χώρες που είναι επί των συνόρων να διαχειριστούν το παγκόσμιο μεταναστευτικό πρόβλημα. Είδατε πριν από λίγες μέρες, οι Ιταλοί δέχτηκαν 500 άτομα, έγινε τεράστιο θέμα. Η κυρία Μελώνη κήρυξε την Ιταλία σε κατάσταση εκτάκτου ανάγκης για 500 άτομα. Σας θυμίζω λοιπόν ότι όταν πήγα στη Μόρια τον Αύγουστο του 2019, είχε 25.000, η κόλαση αυτή είχε 25.000 πρόσφυγες, δυστυχισμένους ανθρώπους, με τεράστια προβλήματα και όταν διαλύθηκε και κάηκε η Μόρια και έγινε στη συνέχεια το νέο κέντρο, το οποίο σήμερα έχει 1.200 άτομα. Και κλείνω. Είναι βέβαιο πως από τη στιγμή που υπάρχει και ένα πρόβλημα, ένα έλλειμμα εργατικών χεριών στην Ευρώπη, θα πρέπει η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση να πάρει ριζικές αποφάσεις, να δημιουργήσει όλες τις συνθήκες και πολιτικές και διαχειριστικές, έτσι ώστε να μην είμαστε όλοι θύματα και να υπηρετούμε τους σκοπούς των διακινητών, οι οποίοι φέρνουν εδώ τους δυστυχισμένους ανθρώπους και τους παρατάνε στα ποτάμια και στη θάλασσα. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you, Mr. Chrysochoidis. I don't know, Mr. Kalpadakis, if you agree, because Mr. Chrysochoidis said that the European Union should be more responsible and more active in the area. And is that the same thing with the United States? What do you think the role should be of both the European Union and the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, I most certainly agree that the European Union should be more active in the region as a whole and have a more active foreign policy. And a lot of the challenges we see today are exactly because there is this vacuum. Because if the EU cannot project being a confident and strong foreign policy force in its own region, its own neighborhood, for example, in the Western Balkans, where it has made commitments to the countries of the Western Balkans to move ahead, particularly North Macedonia, and we haven't seen this going ahead. If it cannot inspire that it is a strong foreign policy force in its own immediate neighborhood, like the Western Balkans, or like Cyprus, or like the Eastern Mediterranean, how can it do it on a more global level? So we need to see more leadership from the European Union on this issue. We certainly need to see more leadership on the question that the minister referred to, which is migration, and we need a migration and asylum pact from the European Union. And we certainly need, the minister referred to having clear messages, but I didn't hear him say the message of turning illegal migration to legal migration. What we need is legal pathways and resettlement pathways from countries like Turkey or from countries around the region towards the EU. A few weeks ago, the minister of the government of Austria, no less, said that in order to keep up the level of conditions of the economy for the next 5 to 10 years, they need at least 250,000 migrants in Austria. We need to talk about legal migration. At the same time, as the minister rightly said, we need to be very clear against the instrumentalization of migrants and refugees, as we saw in Evros 3 years ago, and the instrumentalization by Turkey at that time, the instrumentalization also by traffickers. So we need the instruments to do this. At the same time, we cannot, and SYRIZA certainly does not, see the migration issue only as an issue of instrumentalization. And it does not see the role of Greece as a force whose only role is to push back, if I may say, outside quotations, the flows that might come from Asia and the broader region. What we need to do is have an effective policy, protect our borders, but Greece cannot take up the responsibility of all other European countries in terms of protecting borders. We need a strong migration and asylum agreement. We need legal pathways that come from Turkey and an agreement with Turkey on these issues, the way we had started building in 2018 and 2019. And in 2018 and 2019, and there I will disagree with the minister, Moria did not have 25,000 right before the elections. It had 5,000 to 7,000. It did have 25,000, though, that is true, after a few months, and that is a problem. And so the EU has to take a clear position, both in relation to Turkey, with a new EU-Turkey agreement that will be able to regulate and to commit Turkey to a sound policy on these issues, and to commit itself to legal migration pathways, but also an agreement that will make sure that the first-line countries, the countries that are in the borders of the European Union, do not have all the burden of this issue. But what we need is broader agreements on the question of migration, and it is not enough to have a policy oriented just to protecting borders. Very quickly on the US, I was very glad to hear from the ambassador her full support on the 3+1. I know we should be fighting for this because it is a very important format, a very important framework, and we need to have a ministerial as soon as possible. I think this projects exactly what we need to do in the region. I think, though, we have to take some steps beyond that. The United States has been, for example, very supportive on the question of the PRESPA agreement and resolving the name issue with North Macedonia. We need to have it give some very clear messages that are not limited in the Eastern Mediterranean to saying we support dialogue. That is not enough from the US. We need clear messages the way it gives in other regions, for example, in Ukraine, where it is very clear that questions of territorial integrity or questions of defense of a country's territory are not under discussion. From that point on, we can set up a framework the way we have for the last 20 years between Greece and Turkey in different points with the consultation talks and the exploratory talks to restart, to reach détente after the elections, and then hopefully to go to the International Hague Court for delimiting our continental shelf and exclusive economic zone.
Thank you, Mr. Cagaptay. Mr. Kalpadakis mentioned the agreement between Greece and Turkey on the immigration. He mentioned possible go to the International Court to discuss our difference. How do you see the scenarios of the Turkish ties with Greece after the elections in Turkey?
Thank you, Alexia. So I think the answer is really simple in the short term. The elections in Turkey are quite competitive, probably the most competitive race at the ballot box for President Erdogan. He's won many elections until recently, but he's never won elections while not delivering growth. So, and the economy is not in good shape, and the opposition is united, and so it's quite a competitive race. So it could turn out either way. So the answer is quite easy in the short term, if the opposition wins or Erdogan wins, because notwithstanding President Erdogan's efforts in the last decade or so to change Turkey's identity at home from a more secular one to a more Islamic, and internationally from more European to more Middle Eastern, I think these efforts have been only partially successful. Notwithstanding these efforts, there's a fact. Turkey's economy is completely integrated with that of the European Union. Because of customs union in place since 1995, EU is still the source of 70% of foreign direct investment coming to Turkey. It's still Turkey's major trading partner. Turkey is part of European supply chains. European countries are part of Turkish supply chains. So it doesn't matter who wins. The winner will want to improve economic ties with Europe and will want a reset. That also means embracing a positive attitude towards Greece. The winner will want to, in the short term, whether it's Erdogan or opposition, will want to deepen and broaden customs union, which now includes only industrial goods. They will want to include services and add agricultural goods to it. That means getting along well with all EU members who will have a veto on whether the customs union can be broadened and deepened. In the midterm, though, I think the policies will be different. After a reset, after investment from Europe and maybe a green light from all EU member countries, including Greece, for deepening of customs union, I think President Erdogan has proven himself to be a completely transactionalist in ties with Europe and EU, and so we'll go back to that. He'll be leveraging issues. It doesn't matter what the issue is, playing countries against each other, Russia, United States, EU, Israel, Arab countries, China, Iran. So far, you could say this policy has worked. Turkey got much of what it wanted in places such as Libya, South Caucasus, and Syria, but transactionalist foreign policy, midterm. If the opposition wins, I think that we'll see kind of a return back to a pro-transatlantic foreign policy. Opposition is more aligned with the idea of Turkey kind of embracing EU and NATO on basis of shared values. And so I think in the midterm, ties will be more positive, and with not just Greece, but with the EU in general, and with also NATO allies in case of an opposition win. So I guess the answer is in the short term, it will be great. In the midterm, there'll be differences depending on who's in power in Ankara.
Thank you. Professor Barkey, do you agree? What's the next day of Turkey will be after the elections in Turkey? Will be better for Turkey or not?
I'm sorry, what will be better?
About the next day of the elections in Turkey, how do you see the next day, whether Erdogan wins the election or Kılıçdaroğlu?
Well, look, you have to look at it from different constituencies. I mean, in Turkey, there is a large group of people who have suffered a great deal under Erdogan, so if Erdogan wins the election, people will still stay in jail. That's not going to change. However, where I agree with Soner is that when you look at Turkey's economic situation today, it is actually really, really bad. And in fact, they have managed to mask it, but when you look at just the earthquake is going to cost between 8 to 12% of gross domestic product. Right. They will need aid. They will need probably an IMF plan. They will need market access of Turkish exports. I mean, the Turkish manufacturing sector is actually in very good shape, unlike the rest of the economy. So, but where is that help going to come from? It's going to come from the United States and from Europe. And so, in that sense, Turkish policy will change. And we've already seen some changes. I mean, Erdogan has stopped the overflights of Greek islands and Greek territory. He hasn't done this because he's nice, because he realizes he cannot antagonize. The big issue here is going to be how the United States government deals with it, right? Whether or not the US government will use, let's say Erdogan wins the election and wants to move things forward. There is a split in the US government between the administration to some extent and Congress. Congress has taken a much harder line and kind of is playing the bad guy, which is actually a good thing because it gives the administration some room to maneuver. But the administration really has to put pressure on the Turks on a whole series of things, including rhetoric. Right. When you look at the rhetoric against, I mean, things were mentioned here earlier too, the rhetoric against Greece, but the rhetoric against the United States, all of these things have played a very important role in the formation of the Turkish political, should we say, mind frame. I mean, 70% of the Turkish public thinks that the biggest threat to Turkey comes from the United States. Right. So we are a NATO member thinks, essentially the public thinks that the leading member of the alliance is actually threatening them. So these things have to change. But the administration, the State Department in particular, has to start thinking in a much more precise way of putting pressure on the Turks, right? And Congress there will help. If Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu wins, things will change much more rapidly, and between Turkey and Greece as well, because Kılıçdaroğlu understands that Greece is essentially the door into Europe. If you conquer Greece, in terms of, not obviously militarily, but through, shall we say, love, then entrance into Europe will be much easier.
Thank you, Mr. Diakopoulos. Admiral, what do you think? What's the next day will be, whether Erdogan loses or wins the elections?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a $1 billion question, because everybody, not only in Greece, but in Europe and the United States somehow, they're asking this question. Now, I personally am a little bit skeptical again. First of all, let's see whether the opposition will win. If, it's a big if. Then let's see how the result will be accepted by those who are going to lose. And hopefully it will be accepted and there will be a normal takeover of power and everything will go smoothly. But it's not for sure that this will happen. But let's hope. And then you come to the next stage. Even if the opposition wins, will they be a stable government or just what we call a parenthesis, a break? Because they will immediately face huge and enormous problems. I mean, the economic policy of Erdogan, this ergonomics, does not work. So they have to raise the interest rates. They might have to ask the IMF to intervene because the problems are huge, and the earthquake made it worse. These are extremely unpopular in Turkey. And again, Erdogan's party is the biggest and most solid base. The other 6 parties, who the only thing they have in common is their dislike of Erdogan, but they don't have a coherent policy. So we don't know how all these things will play out. Of course, they will try, if the opposition comes, to be more transatlantic and to mend fences with the United States and probably Europe. But again, this is not the popular policy in Turkey, because as Professor Barkey said, anti-Americanism runs deep in Turkish society, and Erdogan and AKP did the most of it to cultivate this anti-American feeling. So abandoning the Russians, sending back the S-400, going all the way back to the United States, it won't be popular. It will be another unpopular policy on top of the unpopular policies which will be necessary for the economy. Will that be easy? I'm not sure. I wish. I mean, let's not here, to say it clearly, for Greece's interest to have a rich, prosperous, democratic, stable Turkey who subscribes to the liberal rules-based international order and the rule of law and the international law and the law of the seas, this is a dream. This is what we want. But it might stay a dream and not become a reality ever again. Anyways.
Thank you. Ambassador, the United States follow closely the election process, both in Greece and in Turkey. How do you see the future of the Greek-Turkish relations after the elections? And what that will be with the Cyprus issue?
Thank you. When it comes to these elections, I'm going to sort of lean a little bit on, this idea that we've talked about already a little bit, which is what is most important in anybody's election, our elections, Greece's elections, Turkey's elections, is that we hear a choice from the people and that's clear. And, we in the United States are looking forward to working with whoever is elected. The results of the election will determine that, and we are looking forward to building the best possible relationships we can, because the Eastern Mediterranean is so important to the United States. We have so much to do. We have so much to do in terms of maritime security, in terms of regional security. That's a lot of the work we are getting underway right now in Cyprus. We are, beyond the election cycle. We have a new government that has really leaned forward in Cyprus to partner with the United States, to stand firmly with transatlantic partners in terms of whether it is combating transnational crime, going after sanctions evaders, and countering Russia. Let's be very clear about it. We've had some really clear signals from President Chrysochoidis' administration, and that has been extremely important for us in the United States. So, as we look forward to getting beyond the next election cycles, I think for the United States part, we are counting on the opportunity to do more, again, because there is so much at stake in this region, which is just so critical.
Thank you.
Κοιτάξτε, όταν ο κύριος Ερντογάν προμηνών απειλούσε τους Έλληνες ότι θα έρθει ένα βράδυ και θα μας στείλει με τους Typhoons βόμβες και να μας καταστρέψει, θυμάστε τότε η αντιπολίτευση του κυρίου Ερντογάν ήταν ακόμα πιο σκληρή και τον προκαλούσε να το κάνει. Άρα λοιπόν η απάντησή μου σε ό,τι αφορά το αποτέλεσμα των εκλογών, που είναι απόφαση του τουρκικού λαού σε σχέση με τις συνέπειες στην περιοχή, το αφήνω να το αξιολογήσει ο καθένας και νομίζω ότι εμείς ως Ελλάδα πρέπει να συνεχίσουμε την πολιτική της σταθερότητας, της ασφάλειας, της αποτροπής, του διαλόγου, της συνεργασίας, αλλά πάντα στη λογική ότι η ακεραιότητά μας είναι αδιαπραγμάτευτη. Δεύτερον, υπάρχει ένας γάμος εδώ και πολλά χρόνια που είναι δυστυχισμένος γάμος. Ο γάμος Τουρκίας-Ευρώπης. Είναι πολλοί στην Τουρκία που θέλουν να διαλύσει αυτός ο γάμος, αλλά δεν μπορεί να διαλυθεί, είναι δύσκολος. Θα κρατήσει αυτός ο γάμος, αλλά δυστυχισμένος. Είναι πολλοί στην Τουρκία οι οποίοι κοιτάζουν ανατολικά και μάλιστα βαθιά ανατολικά προς την Ασία. Είναι άλλο να κοιτάζεις όμως και είναι άλλο να φτάσεις εκεί. Άμα δεν έχεις τα εργαλεία και τα μέσα για να φτάσεις εκεί. Εννοώ ότι οι σχέσεις της Τουρκίας, οι εμπορικές σχέσεις με την Κίνα, τη Ρωσία, την Ινδία, όλες αυτές τις χώρες είναι πενιχρές εμπορικές σχέσεις. Ο κύριος εμπορικός εταίρος και ο μεγαλύτερος επενδυτής στην Τουρκία είναι η Ευρώπη. Είναι ο μεγαλύτερος εμπορικός και επενδυτικός εταίρος και συνεπώς είναι εξαιρετικά δύσκολο να διαλυθεί ο γάμος. Επίσης, ο κύριος Ερντογάν θέλει να ενταχθεί σε αυτόν τον οργανισμό συνεργασίας της Σαγκάης, που είναι ένας πολύ χαλαρός οργανισμός. Είναι ευκαιρία εκεί να πάει, πραγματικά, και να συζητάει με τον κύριο Πούτιν για την παρακμή της Δύσης, αλλά μέχρι εκεί. Παραπέρα δεν πάει αυτή η συνεργασία. Άρα, νομίζω ότι η Τουρκία είναι υποχρεωμένη να συνεργάζεται με την Ευρώπη, με την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, να συζητήσει τα θέματα της αναθεώρησης, της επέκτασης και του εξυγχρονισμού της Τελωνειακής της Ένωσης και να δει σιγά-σιγά πιο καθαρά το ευρωπαϊκό της μέλλον. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you. Mr. Kalpadakis, how do you see the next day of the Greek-Turkish relations after the elections? Do you think the positive climate from the earthquake diplomacy will continue?
Well, I hope so, but we have to see how. It's very different to talk about a positive climate and very different to actually discuss the conditions in which to promote diplomatically relations. For example, in the meeting between Prime Minister Mitsotakis and President Erdogan in Istanbul, there was a positive climate. But afterwards, there were actions taken that undermined this, as we consider from the Turkish side. So what we need to be looking at is to see what are the possibilities and what are the tools for the day after the elections, irrelevant of who is elected. I think a lot of what the Admiral said is true about the dynamics and what our colloquiators have said. For Greece, I think the most crucial issue is to see how this climate can be turned into a substantial and very consolidated dialogue on the basis of international law with the support of our allies. I believe, to take over the metaphor that the minister used, if this is a wedding, a marriage that is, yes, that is an unhappy marriage, I think after the elections there might be a little effort to revive it. And if there is a bit of an effort to revive it, the effort will be focused on the economic relations, I think. In 2015-16, it was focused on the refugee issue, and that was the basis to promote the relations. I think exactly for the reasons that you have said, we will be looking at the economic relations, and so the discussion will be about how to revive it in the economic relations between Turkey and the EU, and perhaps the defense or strategic relation between US and Turkey. What we have to be clear, though, is that, as you have said, sir, that the Greece and Cyprus element is crucial to the revival of this unhappy marriage. And it can be a very crucial element to make a sustainable, the relationship more sustainable, the way it was, for example, during the period of 1999-2004, when Greece was at the same time trying to negotiate some of these issues on the basis of international law that we have discussed on economic maritime zones, and at the same time it was a champion of Turkish accession between 1999 and 2004. In 2015 to 2016, before the heinous coup attempt in Turkey, Greece was a champion of cooperating with Turkey, of the EU-Turkey cooperation on the refugee and migration issues. Then Prime Minister Tsipras had visited Izmir in order to discuss this before the European Council built up the new framework for refugee issues. So I think if this is an unhappy marriage, Greece has an interest to help revive it. We shouldn't be too ambitious of how much it can be revived, but we should be looking at the possibilities and underlining the importance of Greece and Cyprus, as you have said. And I think on this issue, we also need to also have even stronger Greece-Cyprus coordination in order to look ahead after the elections.
Thank you. So, Mr. Cagaptay, is it possible to have a happy marriage between Turkey and the European Union after the elections?
Great question to end. It was a great panel. I learned a lot. Since this is the last turn, it looks like we're speaking. First of all, I agree with the Admiral on the need to change the mindset in the EastMed to win-win. What I suggested is not my take, it's my analysis that the United States really has a win-win attitude. I think it wants to maintain good ties with Turkey and Israel, Turkey and Greece at the same time. It's, I think, Israel that doesn't trust President Erdogan, even with the reset between Turkey and Israel, that wants to put more of its eggs into the Greek basket and fewer into the Turkish basket. I also have to disagree with the Admiral slightly that this idea of a Turkey that's European and liberal democratic is a dream. 20 years ago, just before Erdogan, or in fact into the first decade of Erdogan rule, a lot of think tanks and other places that would do democracy indicators would put Turkey in terms of rights and freedoms not far from Greece and Italy. So I think this is not a dream. It's historically rooted development. I think Turkey has slipped significantly in terms of rights and freedoms in the last decade. So it's in a different place. Not that the Admiral is doing it. I think it's Orientalist to say Turkey will never be European. It's a dream. I think that there is a large constituency in Turkey, historically rooted, economically integrated with Europe, a very big middle class that wants to embrace Europe. I think that the elections in Turkey will be historic, right, by whichever way you look at them. Either 20 years of Erdogan rule will end, Turkey will return back to democracy and embrace Europe, and the relationship with Greece will go for a reset, or Erdogan will win and he'll be Turkey's president forever.
Thank you. And Professor Barkey, we have Ukraine. We haven't discussed Ukraine at all. Ukraine is a landmark in the area. What do you think the next day of Ukraine war will be in the Eastern Mediterranean? Ukraine. Yes.
Well, look, I think the one outcome of the war in Ukraine is that I think even if Russia does not get completely defeated, Russia has been defeated because the Russian military did poorly. A lot of the world united against it, the war crimes and so on and so forth. So Russian influence in the region will have diminished considerably. The now famous China, Saudi, Iran deal is also important in the sense that it opens up now negotiations between the Syrians and the Saudis, where the Russians were very, very influential. So Russian influence in general is declining, and the Chinese are not that much of a factor. So what we are seeing now is a very different constellation of outside forces. So Ukraine, in many ways, has become the end of Russia. And I think we should understand that, even if, to go back essentially to also the East Med, the East Med pipeline was not something that the Russians wanted, but there is a way in which not having the East Med pipeline opens up many more opportunities in the event that you have essentially a positive Turkish election, because that a Turkey that opens up then becomes much more of a partner in pipeline traffic, etc. And it creates a great deal more flexibility in the region, because the Russians are out of the gas game when it comes to Europe. Europe will never go back to Russia for gas. So it opens up a great deal of opportunities, for different opportunities for East Med countries. So in all of this, it's unfortunate that he had to take a war to get these results, but I think that Russia is facing a terrible future.
Thank you. And Admiral Diakopoulos, a comment about Russia and the role of Russia in the area?
How much time do we have?
It's 40 seconds.
40 seconds. The role of Russia in the area is disruptive. In 40 seconds. Now, if we want some more, for some reasons, which are not, we don't have the time, 30 seconds to analyze, United States ceased to be the main security and stability provider in the area. And that had a lot of consequences, many consequences. The strategic autonomy that Turkey was looking after, the Russian interference in Syria and everywhere and that stuff. The thing with Russia and the meddling of China, which started first economically, but now, as we saw in the Middle East, they're mediators between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that's a big deal. That's the big geopolitical thing that we have to discuss in the area. Now, Russia cannot establish an order of its own, but has a power of disruption. Russia doesn't want the stability. I mean, if the West wanted to have stability and everybody to resolve their issues and then have all the energy deposits going smoothly and everything, and to have the whole area anchored to the West, that would be what the West wants. This is exactly the opposite that Russia wants. Russia knows that every international problem that is being solved, for example, the one with Greece and Northern Macedonia, Mr. Kalpadakis talked about, immediately the country then applies to go to NATO and EU and that stuff. So it leaves the geopolitical space of Russia and goes to the geopolitical space of West. So Russia doesn't want the Cyprus problem to be ever solved, doesn't want any problem to be solved, because with the whole turmoil, they can interfere and disrupt. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. We spent 1 hour full of information, knowledge and analysis. Ambassador, thank you very much. Mr. Chrysochoidis, Mr. Diakopoulos, Mr. Cagaptay, Mr. Kalpadakis and Mr. Barkey. Ευχαριστώ και εσάς για την προσοχή σας.